We've mentioned the OW2 Good Governance initiative a couple of times today, so this is the presentation about the OW2 Open Source Good Governance initiative. At OW2, an initiative is a joint effort between members and non-members to address market need. The need here is that for guidance as to how to properly manage open source software. So we're going to look at why we are doing this initiative, then what we are actually doing, and then where we're actually going with what we have. There's no doubt that open source software is growing and becoming mainstream. We even have the figures to demonstrate it. The one to your left here is from a recent study by Red Hat that explains that within the next 2 years, 2/3 of an enterprise software stack will be made of open source software. The one to the right is from a well-known study by Sonotype, so well-known result by Sonotype that says that for any new application, 80 to 90% of the code comes from existing components, many of which, of course, are open source. But there is another evolution that we are interested in for the OW2 initiative here, is that open source is growing from an initial market of open source aware users towards a growing market of skeptical users, or maybe more precisely, users that have been educated with proprietary software and that may feel uncomfortable with adopting open source. And that's understandable because open source is maybe one reality, but it has different perspectives: financial, commercial, technical. There is even this community dimension that may feel a little bit new, etc. The need we are addressing for a consistent, integrated approach that can bring results to organizations in terms of economies, budget economies, digital sovereignty, technical responsiveness, etc., but also an approach that is compatible with the management structure of these organizations. That is, an approach that can be adapted to the specifics of its organization, an approach that can be shared so that organization can understand compare them each other, an approach that also can be managed, meaning with actions and activities that can be properly identified, and a methodology that can be measured, meaning of which we can measure the progress. So that's the need we are addressing, and we have developed, and we are still developing, I must say, a methodology that is based on pursuing 5 goals: the usage goal, trust goal, culture goal, engagement goal, and strategy goal. These goals should be obtained through activities, and these activities are described with scorecards, what we call scorecards. So that's the simple blueprint you need to have in mind for this comprehensive approach: scorecards that describe activities that helps to obtain the goals. Goal by goal, what do we have? We have the usage goal, the first one, which is about being efficient in using open source software. So it's all about having the technical skills and properly managing the portfolio of open source software that we have. So we are identifying activities to pursue that goal, and some verification points, such as having an inventory of the open source used, or an inventory of the required skills that we may be needing. At this stage, I must say that the activities that we are suggesting here are generic. They are to be customized by each organization so that they can actually literally own these activities and apply to the activities, KPIs, etc., that really match their way of functioning. So that was the usage goal. The next goal is the trust goal. It's about using open source software in an environment or in a way that is safe and dependable. So it's about properly managing dependencies, properly managing vulnerabilities, making sure that we don't import vulnerabilities with reusing components. It's about managing legal compliance, both from the standpoint of the components that we import or the license that we attribute to code that we may publish as open source software, etc. So the verification points here are such like using the proper tools to manage dependencies, for instance, or having appointed a person to manage legal compliance. The next goal is what we call the culture goal. We know that open source software is not just about technology or legal compliance, but it's about working together. So it's about people and culture. So this goal is about making sure that the development team feel that they belong to the open source community at large, that they are empowered to reach out to other projects, to communicate in mailing lists, to attend events, etc. So we identify certain activities here and verification points to make sure that the development team feel comfortable in using open source. So that's, let's say this is the individual perspective. And now there is the corporate perspective with the engagement goal. And the idea is to make sure that the organization engages with the open source ecosystem, understands that the sustainability of this ecosystem is its own interest, really. So we have identified some activities such as making sure we contribute back to open source project, or we contract with open source software vendors and we pay for their support plans, for instance, or participating in open source events and with the related verification points. And the last goal is the strategy goal. It's about proactively using open source software for innovation and competitiveness, understanding that open source is a vehicle for digital transformation, and making sure that open source is visible at the highest level of the hierarchy of an organization. So we have some verification points, and even as to making sure that open source is mentioned in the annual report, for instance. So we have redefined the activities. Again, as I said, these activities are generic, but we have managed a workable, useful structure with a description of the activities, then the activity or the opportunity assessment, so the motivation for the activity, why this activity is relevant, that's the next structure section here. Then we have an activity section about how we measure progress, what sort of KPIs we want for each of the activities. Then the next section is about the tools that are recommended to make sure that we implement properly the activities, properly and efficiently the activity. Then there is another section which is useful about recommendations. So this is where we try to collect feedbacks and lessons learned by other users. We can develop this methodology by using different tools. We're actually developing a web app to facilitate the deployment of the methodology, but at the moment we are using a bug tracker with an issue template to define each activity. We use this environment to manage the users, the owners of the activities or the participants in the activities, and to track the progress of the activities. So that's the sort of thing we need to implement. So in the end, the idea is you have your game plan for implementing good open source governance, and this game plan will, or the methodology or the dashboard, we have a dashboard that can help you manage the progress. So you can define your priorities, you can define some milestones, you can identify the activities that are in progress, those that are on hold, not started yet, etc. And you can use this approach to report to the top management. So now, where do we go with this? So we understand that we're not on our own in this space. There are great resources from the Linux Foundation, especially from the To Do group, but also from OpenChain. And for instance, in France, we have the TOSIT group, which is a group of large end users sharing best practices. But we feel that we have already now a proper value proposal in terms of this blueprint to help implement corporate-wide open source policies and those 5 goals: usage, trust, culture, engagement, and strategy. So we want to promote this, and we're promoting this through 3 strategic objectives. The first one is that we want to use this to help define what is the state of the art, what it means to be using open source software professionally and in a way that is appropriate. So we want to help define the state of the art in this domain. The next objective is that we want to work for all the sectors of activities, not just the software vendors or systems integrators or those platform companies that live and grow by developing software, but we want to look at the other sectors: transportation companies, retail companies, manufacturing companies, local or central administrations, healthcare organizations, etc. So these are the people we want to work for, and we understand that it would be more productive to develop this from a European perspective. Of course, the lessons will be global, but I think the driving force will be European in our efforts. And the third objective is to actually develop and keep running and maintain a platform that is as open and accessible as possible for people to learn from others and for people to share their experience. We understand that OW2 cannot develop that all by itself, so we are doing this at the European level, and we've approached open source non-profit organizations based in Europe, starting with the Eclipse Foundation. We've also approached the Free Software Foundation Europe or the Foundation for Public Code, and we are working together to promote this methodology, this resource. We've also presented it to large end users, and some of them have already committed to beta test it and then to provide us some feedback, which should take us towards the end of the year with a mature methodology. So that's our timeline for 2021. We are now in the end of the second quarter. We are recruiting our beta testers. We have a framework, a blueprint. We will work from between now and the end of the year to mature this methodology, and then towards the end we can even onboard vendors. We think that there is room for consultants to provide support to end users to implement this methodology. So how you can, it's an open effort, how you can get in on it. So at the moment, the entry point is open source _governance, which is the page of the initiative on the OW2 website, where that takes you to what we call the resource center, from which you can create your user account. But we are developing another website with these non-profit organizations from Europe. So stay tuned for more about the OW2 Good Governance initiative and our methodology.